Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my end of July into August 2024 am reading video. I am posting this now a little more than halfway into the month of August, and I'm making an executive decision about these am reading videos. I have fallen pretty far off the wagon with, what was supposed to be three weekly videos per month, and I'm going to be suspending them for a little while to try and, catch up on some reading, and I'll have other videos coming out this month as well, so I can focus on making those, and hopefully I'll have a monthly wrap-up video at the end of the month as well. But yeah, it's been a hectic few weeks. I'm transitioning into a new role at work and have other stuff I'm trying to get through as well in my life, and so I figure I should, realize when I have to make some adjustments. And I hope to be back to my weekly am reading schedule in coming months. I also hope to get through this video relatively quickly because, well, first of all, I'm filming in the morning before work, and also, as you might be able to hear from outside, there is some construction going on outside my condo, and so I have to stop putting it off even if there is noise in the background. But anyway, let's get back to the books, and as always in these am reading videos, I'll start with what I'm reading in a short story collection. And back in July, I picked up the Michigan Quarterly Review Winter 2024 edition. And the short story I read this week is called Alive by Spencer Hyde. This is a historical fiction short story where we're following the Coventry Blitz. It's 1940. Our main character is a 10-year-old boy named William. I think this, kind of lends a little bit of distance from what's happening. I mean, it's not supposed to be, a melodramatic accounting of a very, harrowing time in history where, the Germans were just continuously dropping bombs on Coventry. William's certainly aware of it. He's spending most of his nights in a bomb shelter, and also members of a bomb squad are boarding in his home. And it's just him and his mother and the members of this bomb squad, and his father was also killed in the war. And it's just about sort of the realities or the unrealities of life during this time where, they're attempting normality to a point where he's going to school and having meals with his mom and, well, also this bomb squad, but also, spending his nights in bomb shelters and also seeing these unexploded bombs everywhere that these men he's growing to know and care about are trying to defuse at major cost and risk to their own lives. And it's just a lot of visceral detail, and then Hyde brings in something that Spencer's learning about in school about how some things are, fossils and so forth have been frozen in history, and it kind of is this metaphor in a way for some of these bombs that are bomb parts that just are so numerous and get, buried in the ground that they might resurface in later times. And indeed, we end in a quota 30 years later where William and his family are on the beach, and they come across one of these old bombs that was dropped, and, it has to, be diffused, and they have to leave, for their own safety. And certainly in 1940, it's just constant. In fact, William's mother ultimately makes the decision she just can't stay here anymore, as even her own neighborhood is getting bombed, and just by the luck of the draw, her house is mostly fine. So she and her is preparing to leave with William to go stay with relatives elsewhere. And then, of course, I think maybe it's a little obligatory for a story like this where there's a bomb where someone from William's class that we've, who's been built up as a little bit of a character, and then his favorite of the bomb squad men, they are ultimately killed in an explosion. And so, it's just really, it's well done, and I think it just really brought the harrowingness of this sort of experience together from the perspective of a young boy who maybe takes it in as sort of, you know, something that like he's even in less control of than anyone else, and becomes this sort of picture of unreality that becomes reality, really, of life. Next, I finished Ruby by Karen D. McIntyre. This is a self-published book that, put out by a local to me author. I met her, in fact, a few years ago at a writing convention, and I figured I would give her book a try. This is historical fiction as well, taking place in the 1930s in rural Virginia. And the book begins, I think I went through it in my last damn reading video, with Ruby coming home. She's been laid off from a teaching job, and she's on her way home to Roanoke, Virginia to, you know, stay with her family again, her parents again. She befriends a man on a bus named Ray, who, you know, takes an active interest in her, and they, you know, strike up a rapport, and Ray offers to drive her home from where she'd have to wait at the sheriff's station. His brother Joe is coming to pick him up, and it turns into that this is a trap, that they've ensnared her. These two men are sex traffickers, and they drug Ruby, assault her, and intend to sell her, but then she struggles in an, you know, an altercation with them and breaks her leg. It heals badly, and now she's damaged goods. They call her the Gimp a lot. So they keep her around their house, you know, for cooking and cleaning, and for, you know, assault, and also, you know, for assistance, as it were, with other women they kidnap and ultimately sell away. And Ruby becomes this figure of resilience for the women. She tells them about her parents who would take them in if they ever, you know, are able to free themselves. And this leads, I mean, there's other attempts where she, you know, tries to run, or one other attempt where she tries to run and it doesn't work. But, you know, her relationships that she builds up with the other women leads to her getting ultimately rescued herself. And then, you know, for the rest of the book, well, she starts out living with the woman who rescued her, who like has this sort of safe house slash semi-brothel for the women if they want to work as sex workers. Although ultimately Ruby sort of does a whole, I guess, come to Jesus morality moment about that. Ruby gets on her feet, like she, you know, goes to the hospital for her leg, and, you know, there's a little bit of, you know, I guess emotional, like, can I go back to my parents or not? All the shame I feel, and, you know, some other women, you know, have trouble going home again and face being ostracized by their families. Then she runs into an old friend who ends up being a doctor at this hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina, is where she is now. And ultimately she does return home for a bit. She's living with her parents, who are very supportive of her, and other women that she, you know, came across her path at Joe and Ray's come back into her life a little bit, and, you know, there's a kind of hopeful ending about her, you know, deciding how she's going to, you know, live the rest of her life, and, you know, survive. It's a hopeful story, and there is, you know, a wrap up also kind of with the antagonists. Ultimately, I don't think this story had a lot of polish. I think it didn't really nail any emotionality, interiority, not a lot of descriptions, physical descriptions weren't all that great. A lot of the chapters kind of had these like neat little wrap-ups, and I just feel like I wish that this story had a little more polish to it. It definitely felt very self-published to me. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in here. She did definitely her due diligence with historical research, and maybe also that's another little niggle where sometimes it felt like she kind of awkwardly crammed it into a fictional setting, her historical research. Yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting idea. I do feel like, in a way, the beginning worked better, maybe because, you know, it's easier to want to root for Ruby when she's really in harm's way, but then actually having to put her through the emotional and personal journey of coming out of that, that's like a little, you know, more difficult. I would think that, I don't know, maybe that's just me, I think that might be more difficult than reading or writing about her you know, in that, you know, very fraught situation in the beginning where you don't have to think too deeply about sort of more complicated questions about survival. Yeah, just another, and just even throughout the story, again, just some of the writing I think was a little rough, but I'm glad I gave it a go. She's, you know, actually made a bit of a following with this novel and similar novels she's written in a series about like resilience during the 30s and the 40s. And hopefully she, as well as any writer like myself, are continuing to improve as we go along. I also finished Stolen Beauty by Laurie Lica Albanese. This is more historical fiction, also World War II historical fiction in part. This takes place mostly in Vienna, and in fact there are two storylines. We start in 1938 when Hitler has more or less been invited into the country rather than Austria trying to fight them off. And this almost immediately spells doom for Austria's Jews. And we're seeing it from the perspective of an assimilated Jewish woman, Maria, from a very wealthy family. So, I mean, the first thing they are targeting with her family is their wealth to, you know, give to the Third Reich. Maria's journey is about, you know, in the immediate 1930s, about, you know, her and her husband escaping to get out of Austria alive. And then the rest of her story going through the centuries is very tied into her aunt's story, which is the second story in this. Her Aunt Adela was this salon host and thinker of, you know, the early 20th century. You know, it was, you know, very avant-garde and new for a woman, of course, to, you know, be in this sort of position of power. She, in fact, didn't have a great education growing up, but, you know, she was able in her marriage to finagle her way into a much more modern existence, including she was the muse for some paintings by Austrian painter Gustav Klimt. And in fact, all of this is based off of real history, that the Nazis stole the artwork that Adela was, you know, it was her artwork that she posed for. And Maria in later generations is fighting the Austrian government to get it back. And in fact, there's a movie about this starring Helen Mirren and Ryan Reynolds, which focuses much more on Maria's quest in like the, I think, late 90s and early thousands. But this is a little bit more, I guess, about the whole journey, and even about Adela, and sort of, you know, for her, it's, in a way, it's a well-worn, but I think intriguingly done here, tale about, you know, what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a Jew during these times. I mean, because, you know, the anti-Semitism that explodes in the 1930s also had some roots in, you know, the earlier parts of the century and before, but as assimilated Jews who, you know, were able to get ahead to a certain point, they still feel the effects of this anti-Semitism, and Adela is grappling with that, and, you know, grappling with the beginnings of Zionism and what that might mean for the people, and grappling with her identity as, you know, as a patron of the arts and a scholar in her own right, and her relationships and what it all means. And it's very interesting, and then that gives a lot of pathos to how connected Maria is to this legacy in her own story as her own story goes on. So I thought it was moving. I think some parts of the narrative were a little trundling, but overall I think that Albanese stuck the landing, and I'm grateful, you know, to get this type of perspective. I think I tend to lean sometimes, you know, I try not to read too much Holocaust fiction, and for a little while I was certainly, the subgenre I was leaning into the most was that of artistic theft and other sorts of theft that the Nazis did, and I feel like this gave like a unique and perhaps less harrowing than many other Holocaust stories, but still very much about what the Nazis attempted to steal from the Jews, and how, you know, their heirs fought to get it back. I also forgot about this book until I realized in July that I was reading the final 7 stories out of it. This is The Best American Short Stories of the Century, edited by John Updike, and I've been holding up this book for years now and slowly reading through it since 2016. And most of my videos are in my short story spotlight that I make in July in honor of my birthday month, and I've just been reading 7 at a time, and I finally gotten to the very end. So yeah, and I even got to read them at the beach and like make a fun video about it that I'll link down below. And it feels really good to, you know, knock something like this off of the list. And I went back through my old videos to revisit some of my thoughts about my the older works that I have read. And yeah, to take sort of this glimpse at, you know, what was moving American writers starting like, you know, in the 1910s and moving, you know, into the end of the 20th century. And like, you know, there's, you know, the themes of racism and of, you know, women having more, you know, public autonomy, and, you know, the industrialization of various fields and all of that sort of stuff that take us through the history in this country that, you know, are talked about in these short stories. And then there's, you know, universal themes about, you know, people grieving loved ones, confronting death, or living life in various ways. Yeah, I really enjoyed this journey. And speaking of short story collections, I finally finished Calm Sea and Prosperous Voyage by Bette Howland. I know I read a couple of short stories in earlier videos I did in July. And so this is a collection. It has an interesting history where Bette Howland actually was a well-known writer. She was a prestigious writer, won a lot of prestigious awards back in the mid-20th century, and then she stopped writing and was relatively forgotten until the editor of this publisher, who found some of her work and was intrigued by her and gathered up a bunch of her short stories that she wrote back in the day. Howland died, in fact, before this book came out. But yeah, her short stories are predominantly taking place in the mid-20th century in Chicago and feature Jewish American characters. And it's definitely, I guess, a very literary sort of book. It's the sort of writing that only the snobbish sect might really be all that intrigued by. It's something you really have to work at to understand the writing. I mean, and for my tastes, it's not, I think, my very favorite type of writing. Probably my least favorite in terms of short stories is more surrealist stuff. I don't connect to that as much. But my favorite tends to lean in on interiority of characters, and this isn't very interior about characters. I feel like she keeps a bit of a distance from her characters, and her writing can be kind of thick sometimes, but it's so descriptive, and I feel like in a vast canvas way it really draws a picture of what Chicago was like. You know, some of her stories are about taking place in a public library or in a courtroom to sort of, you know, get the cadence of the people who come there and why. And then a lot of stories are very much based on her Jewish family, and you see recurring characters and the sorts of things that the family grapple with assimilation and life and death. And a lot of it also, you can see what, you know, was important to her, or how she fit into that world where she was this divorced mother who was kind of a little bit on the outsides of the family, and she's trying to also grapple with the realities of growing older, and so much of it is like the push and pull between the generations. And the stories have a sort of, you know, stream of consciousness feel of moving from one character to the next and that sort of thing. So if you are interested in, you know, that sweeping narrative and, you know, just beautiful descriptive writing that, you know, you can see that she's very talented in really understanding a place and bringing it to life in that way. So yes, really, you know, especially after reading all of the stories together, you can really get a picture, and I'm just glad I read this. And finally, I'm going to talk about the VIXEN by Francine Prose, which I think is my favorite book of my recent Am Reading videos and my first novel-length book by Prose, which I chose for my page 112 tag in July. So yes, this is historical fiction, so much is. It taking place in the 1950s, and we're following a young man named Simon Putnam. The story opens at the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in 1953. They were executed for espionage. They were accused of being Soviet spies. The trial was sort of marred in questionability. It was the McCarthy age. It was an age less of justice, I think, for a lot of people, and a lot more about witch hunts. I think, you know, a lot has been declassified since then, and it's pretty obvious that Julius was actively spying. Ethel's culpability is more questionable, and also just the idea even of execution as the punishment is still something people question. But this is taking place, well, in the thick of it, of this McCarthy era. And Simon was a young man whose own future is a little bit upended. Upended in various ways. Like here he is, he has this Puritan name, which was some anti-Semitic joke that his ancestor got coming off the boat. And he is trying to hide his ancestry a bit. He went to Harvard, he was hoping to go to grad school, he studied all sorts of, European mythology, but he wasn't able to get into grad school, so now he has to get a job. And his similarly assimilated, and much more, successful Uncle Manny gets him a job as like a low-level editor in publishing, in a publishing house that's supposed to focus on publishing like literary greats. But like a lot of publishing, what really pays the bills is genre stuff. And unfortunately, what comes across Simon's desk isn't only, I guess, genre. It's more, smut, and it's more, a hack writing job that's painting Ethel particularly as this Soviet sex spy. And the reason is, that his boss Warren gives him is, this is going to save the company because people want to read smut. We're peddling the smut, and then, people will pay us and we can, publish the good stuff. And Simon has a lot of angst about this, not only because of political feelings about what happened to the Rosenbergs, but also Ethel Rosenberg went to school with his mother. And yeah, the relationship has now been a bit outsized in his head and his mother's head, but he feels this personal sort of duty to, follow the wishes that Ethel herself gave her lawyer, like to not drag her name through the mud after she's gone. And so in the beginning, he's trying to work with the author, Anya, to maybe change the story up a little, but then as he goes deeper down the rabbit hole, he realizes things aren't what they seem about how this story came to be. And a lot of it is a lot of commentary on realities of the McCarthy era and anti-communist propaganda, and how the higher-ups were trying to influence public opinion in America during this time. And there's this whole feeling of Big Brother watching, and if you, seem too close to, anyone is certainly accused of communism, you could be blackballed. And I really fell for this, for the character work. I just loved how Simon was grappling with what he was being presented with. I loved his even personal affiliation for these vengeful Viking stories, and how it sort of it influenced his own narrative in his own head, and like how he viewed himself as the center of the story. And actually, you can tell from the writing that he's looking at it from a distance, and, thinking like at the time this was such a big deal to him, but he realizes, later in life that he's not the center of the story. Although I feel like you have to give Simon a little more credence than his older self did about being afraid of what was happening because of this blackballing and this Big Brother watching. It's not like, bad things maybe could happen to you if you step too close to communist sympathy, or maybe not for, a low-level editor. Who knows? But the way that he, went through the story, I found so compelling, and the commentary on sort of political realities, and there was even like a, you know, it was a mix of humor and seriousness. There was a bit of his own life with Anya that became sort of like a sexy spy story in and of itself, which was kind of fun. But I feel like at the end of the day, Simon and I, maybe I felt, as a reader, sometimes I put myself too much into the stories, kind of like Simon is doing. And I felt this affinity for him, for realizing that there should be more nuance in fiction than sometimes audiences want. And I was thinking actually a fair bit about House of the Dragon, the TV show, versus the book, in fact, because the book was written to be this fake history that's very salacious and like sort of questionable narration in and of itself. And the show is supposed to be more nuanced in its characterization, and I feel like there were some people who rebelled against more nuanced characters, and like Simon, here I was realizing I want people to respect, more complicated realities than they actually do. And here's Simon in this story realizing that, the stories of revenge that he loved in school don't match up to what he's hoping people remember about the Rosenbergs here and now, that they're not these one-dimensional villainous characters, or especially Ethel, that Ethel isn't. So, yeah, I just thought there was a lot going on, and also, of course, Simon's Jewish identity crops up a bit in this as well, and what that means in American society. So, yeah, again, I related a lot to that as well. And I'm really glad I read this. Francine Prose has a gajillion other novels out there, and maybe I'll get to some of those as well. And that about covers it for me now. There we have it with AM reading content until maybe late in the month or early September, but I will have other videos coming out throughout this month, including my August page 112 tag, which in fact I've pre-filmed because I get so excited about those. So stay tuned for that. That's my monthly TBR game that I play, where I randomly choose 3 unread books from my shelves, read page 112, and then choose one of them to join my month's TBR. And hopefully I'll actually be reading it in August and getting to a whole bunch of other reading and focusing a little bit less about getting anxious about bringing things together for weekly videos, at least for the near future. But anyway, I hope you all are feeling good about where you are in your reading lives and otherwise lives in this mid-August. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.